This war of mine has an interesting take on the survival genre. Rather than zombies, monsters, or a post-apocalyptic world, it instead takes place during a modern civil war, wherein the government has blockaded supplies from reaching the city that the game takes place in, for fear that it will fall into the hands of the rebels. Normal civilians, including the player, are stuck in the middle and have to struggle to survive against all odds. It's a neat experiment, but one that turns out to be too simplistic to be truly effective as a video game. The presentation is nothing short of powerful. The somber music and depressing art style work together well to drive home the theme of hopelessness. This is pushed further by the different characters' backstories, most of whom lived much more comfortable lives and would never have believed that war would have come to their country. Even if it's a setting that you don't really care for, it's presented in such a way that it's easy to take in the circumstances of the story and feel empathy for the characters. The gameplay is divided into day and night cycles. During the day, the player builds appliances in their shelter to help them survive, such as a stove, beds, weapons, fortifications, and so on. Visitors will also come by in order to trade for supplies or request assistance. Choosing to help a neighbor might require giving up useful supplies or parting with one of your survivors for the next 24 hours, which can be a tough sacrifice. The player may also choose to ignore their neighbor's pleas for help, however doing so will cast a cloud of depression throughout the household, and neighbors will usually come back to return the favor, so it's worth it to help them out. During the night, the player chooses one survivor to scavenge for supplies deep within the city, while the others stay behind to sleep or guard the shelter from invaders. The player needs to navigate the environment quickly and efficiently, and make it back home before sunrise or run the risk of getting caught in the middle of a battle between the military forces. Locations to scavenge range from abandoned buildings to small communities willing to trade, to hostile homes filled with individuals who will attack on sight. Resorting to murder is always an option, although killing innocents will just depress everyone, and fighting heavily armed enemies is often dangerous and a bad idea. The game continues to cycle between day and night, with supplies gathered at night helping the survivors live on for another day, until, finally, a ceasefire is agreed upon to allow the civilians still trapped in the city the chance to safely escape. It's a relief to finally see that ending after just barely making it through a harsh winter, followed by an increase in crime from desperate citizens. It's very unlikely that most players will make it to the end the first time they play, or the second, or third. It took me about 5 playthroughs before I got the hang of it, and it was here that I began to notice the cracks in the game's foundations. The player has no idea what appliances are more important to build first, what supplies need to be collected now and which ones can wait for later, or any of the little intricacies that govern the game's rules, like a character's state of hunger, for example. When you see that someone's hungry, you instinctively want to feed them. It makes sense. But the problem is that the game does not give enough food to feed everyone daily. Does this mean that some characters will have to starve to death? Not at all. Everyone can go one day without eating and it will hardly affect them unless they've been hungry for 3 days straight. By rationing food this way, players will have a much easier time surviving. But there's no way to know that without looking up a guide online or through a lot of retries. Anyone will naturally think, oh, he's hungry, I guess I gotta feed him. But if you try to feed your survivors every day, then you're going to run into trouble fast. Even if you do have the supplies to keep everyone well fed, the extra food is still better used as bartering items. With all this in mind, the stove doesn't need to be built until the 3rd day, which saves up supplies for more useful tools like the crowbar, which allows access to items locked behind doors and can be used as a weapon. It's a domino effect that runs through the whole game, and playing it blind is an aggravating process of trial and error until you finally manage to comprehend the game's rules. But once you've gotten under the hood and understood the game better, a whole new mess of issues begin to emerge. Different locations to scavenge are, more or less, randomized for each playthrough, but the locations themselves remain exactly the same. So if you see the abandoned cottage on the map, then you already know what to expect from that place. On top of this, nothing is ever altered on subsequent visits. In fact, it's a good strategy to gather as many supplies as you can into a central storage center. That way, on subsequent visits, the entire pool of resources you have to work with are in one handy window that's easy to manage, rather than running all over a building. This comes off as really silly, first off because it's absurd how someone managed to shove 20 planks of wood and various other things into a refrigerator, but secondly, why is no one else trying to scavenge this house? It's not like you have the exclusive rights to pillage here or something. There are looters in the supermarket and bums that live in the school, but they don't affect anything. It would make sense and make the game much more dynamic if supplies would continuously disappear from a location due to bypassing looters or residential squatters. It would also make sense if stealing from your neighbors would increase crime sooner, but that doesn't happen either. Everything I said about the game's presentation starts to fall flat because the gameplay just undermines the theme that was pushed in the first place. This static approach makes it really easy to abuse the game with advanced knowledge through subsequent playthroughs. The description for the shelled school claims that a shovel is necessary to remove the debris and fully explore the building. And it sure looks like it. But this is actually a complete lie. Removing only one specific pile of debris with your bare hands allows access to the entire school. It is a little bit of a detour, but taking the extra time to travel is far more efficient than spending supplies on building a shovel. You'll still be able to go home that same night with a decent amount of supplies, and you can always come back at any time later to pick up what's been left behind. The description for Sniper's Junction makes it sound like an extremely dangerous area, but in reality, it's a cakewalk to get 100% of the items here. It's actually one of the easiest areas in the whole game to clear. What would have been more useful to mention about Sniper's Junction is that a saw blade is necessary to cut through a metal grate. And what's on the other side of this metal grate? Another metal grate, of course! And how convenient that saw blades are a one-time use item. I originally came here without any saw blades, and now I know that I needed one. So I come back with one saw blade, and now I know that I should have brought two. It's like a child made this game. Yet, it's pretty tough for me to be all that annoyed by this because this game makes save scumming very easy. Even once the player dies, it's possible to quit to the main menu and reload the previous day. Only one save file is allowed at a time, and the game autosaves every morning, but there's nothing barring the player from always trying again as long as the next morning hasn't begun. This is definitely cheating, but the game is hardly all that reliable itself, and in the dumbest ways. Several locations are advised to bring additional supplies for trading, and yet the surrounding area around the merchant is littered with free items. What was even the point of bringing these supplies in the first place? It feels like I just wasted my time. Of course, I could just take some notes and prevent this kind of thing from happening on my next playthrough, since I'm likely to run into the same situation. But I would rather cut out Father Time as the middleman and just fix the situation now by reloading the previous save file. Or better yet, I'll play a game that is well designed and doesn't jerk me around. Making the game more random and dynamic, and balancing out the items and appliances so that build order is more creative and less static, would go a long way towards improving the game. But if not that, then at least don't treat the player like a fool. Make the basic rules intuitive. Don't mislead the player with location descriptions, and each tool should carry their value so I don't feel like building a shovel was a mistake. A recent playthrough with plenty of save scumming took about 20 hours, although a blind playthrough, even with save scumming, will likely take much longer because of the inevitable restart due to valuing the wrong items. It's an interesting game to try out, and there is some replay value in playing as different survivors with different skills and on higher difficulties, but the core of the game isn't strong enough to hold up its flaws. Thank you for watching my review on This War of Mine. If you would like to be updated on my future videos, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on Twitter, or check out my page on Critic.